Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the final lecture of your MEA 100 class. This is all about Chapter 10, Advertising and Commercial Culture. It is a big chapter, so I am going to actually just have it be in this one video. I could split it up into two parts, but I think we'll do one video here. And I recommend that you take your time getting through this. There will be obviously a quiz. Some of this also will wind up on your final. There's also going to be some visual cues that I'm going to go over during this actual chapter. And so my hope is that when I show them to you during this actual lecture that YouTube will not take them down for copyright issues. But in the event that it does, I will make sure that I send you the links in a separate document in your Canvas shell. So just a reminder, if you haven't already, there is an extra credit assignment that you can take advantage of that is attached to this week's module in Canvas. It's all about Super Bowl advertising. We'll talk just a little bit about that coming up in a bit. But in any event, let's get on with Chapter 10, Advertising and Commercial Culture. Well, advertisements, as you know, it's impossible to get away from advertising. It's everywhere and in every media form. It takes the form of social media influencers, which we'll talk a little bit about later this lecture. It appears in Google searches, on Facebook, Instagram, and of course, Twitter/X. For those of you still who obviously are in or pick up a newspaper or who actually read an online edition of a newspaper, you know that ads are very prominent, as is magazines. You see them on buses, billboards, even in public restrooms. They are just everywhere, right? And that doesn't include, obviously, if you're watching a baseball game, you might see them in the background at the backstop or whatever. Ads appear within products themselves. They appear in movies, television shows, music videos, and digital games. A big part of that is called product placement, which is the paid appearance of particular goods in a narrative or scene. We'll talk a little bit more about product placement in this chapter. Ads shape product images and brand name identities. Ads are often viewed in a negative light. I think there's no question that when you're home watching, for example, television, and you're trying to watch your show, that, it can be annoying, right? Trying to flip through that, or you're clicking on a YouTube link and you want to see a video. And of course, you have to deal with some kind of ad ahead of what you want to watch on YouTube. This particular type of year, with an election year going on, lots of political ads that you kind of have to navigate through. Market researchers weigh consumer tolerance for ads. How many ads will they tolerate to get free media content? Meaning, at what point does it start to backfire on a company when they're advertising so much on a particular platform that you are like, I do not want to have anything to do with that product. So it's a balancing act. Well, speaking of ads, speaking of what makes things memorable, obviously ad slogans are probably at the top of the list, right? That companies make these slogans so that, they're so memorable that the minute we think of, for example, having McDonald's, or we hear I'm loving it, we think of McDonald's. But these are the top 10 ads of the 21st century. And I have the wrong list here. I had it in front of me, but this is the correct list. My notes on this list are not here. But anyway, I'll try to get through this. But anyway, the top 10 ad slogans of the 21st century are I'm loving it, which is McDonald's; share a Coke, Coca-Cola; belong anywhere, Airbnb. Of course, anytime you want to go stay out of town, you don't want to stay in a hotel, everyone thinks of Airbnbs. By the way, the I'm loving it ad was first used in 2003. It's catchy, global, connected to music, pop culture through its jingle. And it was initially put together, believe it or not, by Pharrell and Justin Timberlake. Of course, like I said, share a Coke, belong anyway. What's in your wallet? Capital One. I'm sure you've heard that, 1,000 times if you spent any time on media. It's finger licking good, KFC. That's a very popular, obviously, slogan. You have because you're worth it, think different, Apple. Do I have that note here for think different? I do. That was first used in 1997, but dominated in the early 2000s. Why it works: it aligns with Apple's innovation brand, resonates with creatives, rebels, and visionaries. Another one is Let's Go Places for Toyota. Eat Fresh, Subway. I think that's one of the more famous ones out there. And American Runs on Dunkin' Donuts. That's another one. That was first used in 2006. And Dunkin' Donuts, by the way, I mean, you see them out here, of course, but they're very, very popular in the Midwest and the East Coast. But the reason that the American Runs on Dunkin' was used was because it was patriotic plus caffeine. So patriotism and caffeine equal memorable and relatable slogan for busy Americans. And so some others that were up there that I've used before. What happens here stays here. That's obviously Las Vegas. I'm sure you've heard of that one. The happiest place on earth, Disney. Then we have Live Moss, Taco Bell, and it's in the game, EA Sports. So obviously any of those slogans, if you will, are, make those ads very iconic. But let's jump back and say, how did we get here, right? How did advertising come to be? What is its history? And it's got a pretty extensively rich history. Advertising goes back thousands of years. There were clay tablets found in ancient Babylon. Archaeologists unearthed examples of advertising going back to Greeks and Romans, and what they would find is these artifacts with early symbols and identifying signs called attention to the products of artisans who hand produce products ranging from weapons to clothing. So that goes all the way back a couple thousand years. During the medieval period in Europe and England, the town crier was an important advertising medium. Gutenberg's printing press. We've talked about that in other areas of the textbook and obviously the class. But when Gutenberg obviously invented his printing press in the 15th century, that led to posters, handbills, newspaper ads, and of course, as you remember, it led to the Protestant Reformation. So, both the Protestant Reformation and advertising very much part of that Gutenberg printing press. And such a huge invention that changed the world, right? The first printed advertisement in England was produced about 1480, a handbill, a small printed notice that announced a prayer book for sale. And by the late 1600s, ads were common sights in London newspapers, and that became a very traditional thing going forward when you talked about newspapers. Advertising made its way to the American colonies along with the early settlers from England. And if you remember, we started, basically, I guess, colonizing this area, or I shouldn't say this area we're sitting in right now, which is Los Angeles. That has a whole different history. But actually on the East Coast, that was probably the mid to late 1600s. And really in the 1700s is when you start to see a number of things happen. Obviously the Revolutionary War in 1776. But during that 18th century, that era of the 18th century, Ben Franklin, who we've talked about when it comes to other forms of media, well, he was an advertising pioneer, and he made his ads more attractive by using large headlines. And he also he's kind of largely credited with creating classified ads, which for the longest time were a major source of revenue for newspapers. Along with advertising, classified ads were a big deal. You may know them now as Craigslist. There's all sorts of online services these days where you can try to get rid of a bed or find a mattress or a dog crate or whatever. Well, that started in the classified ads section, and that's something that Ben Franklin, was very aware of. He was also, as I think I've said earlier, I think during newspapers, he also tied circulation to advertising, meaning that the more papers that he sold, the more he could then go to a prospective advertiser, a company, a business, and charge more based on the fact that he had more eyeballs looking at their ads. So, and that's exactly what happens today. In fact, right now in the television universe, we're in the tail end of what's called sweeps, or a ratings book, where television stations basically, essentially track their audience, and they track their audience or number of people watching because they're trying to basically charge more for advertising. So when we talk about the Super Bowl, for example, most eyeballs, other than the World Cup, the Super Bowls are going to be always the number one broadcast every year, where you have somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 million people watching. And so therefore, usually those ads are, give or take around $7.5 million for a 30-second episode. So anyway, I know that's kind of a long way from Ben Franklin, but it does tie into circulation and advertising. In any event, how about the Industrial Revolution, right? That comes along in the 19th century. It was in the late 18th, so it begins, I guess you could say, in the late 1700s. But I really have a tendency to, I really, as you know, I teach it. I think it was more prominent. Obviously, I think it gets its start more so in the 19th century, the 1800s. But regardless of the argument, the Industrial Revolution had a profound impact on advertising, reshaping both the methods of promotion and the scale at which businesses could reach consumers. Did it in this way, by the way. It first increased production and mass-produced goods. So the Industrial Revolution enabled businesses to produce goods on a much larger scale due to advances in machinery, factory systems, the rise of mass production techniques. This increased the supply of consumer goods, which created a need for more effective marketing strategies to sell those goods. It also used advertising as a tool for competition. We'll talk a little bit about that coming up here. With a greater variety of products available, businesses had to differentiate themselves. We had the expansion of consumer markets thanks to the Industrial Revolution. So industrialization led to urbanization and the growth of a larger, more geographically dispersed population. Obviously, that included new transportation systems, railroads, steamships. Goods could be distributed more widely, creating national and even global markets. It obviously led to a new consumer base, right? A broader audience. The rise of media channels. We start to see, obviously, newspapers, magazines, pamphlets, literacy rates increased, right? We had obviously, we talked about the fact that in the 1830s, we get the first public school system. And we talked about the success of the penny press. Well, when those newspapers started being produced in a mass scale, what was in those newspapers but advertising goods and services, right? And manufacturers, because of that, could sell to people in cities, towns, and rural areas, and their messages reached a diverse array of socioeconomic groups. Branding and consumer identity, the creation of brands. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that coming up, but certainly, brand association starts very early in that during the Industrial Revolution. We also have technological advancements in advertising, lithography and color printing, the telegraph and the telephone making a huge difference in that regard, instant communication for being able to work, to help distribute products across the country. And of course we had, and I'll save the other two, but basically all of it comes during the Industrial Revolution. So much of what follows here basically has to do with the Industrial Revolution. So as we move on, the development of American advertising. Well, first, American advertising, we one of the things that comes across, I should say, that gets created during the 19th century, and you can actually point to the Industrial Revolution like leading to this, is that basically you get the first American advertising agencies that start to show up. And Volney Palmer is widely considered the first advertising agent in the United States. In 1841, he opened an advertising agency in Philadelphia that acted mainly as what is called a space broker for newspapers. So that was individuals who purchased space in newspapers and sold it to various merchants. So a space broker was an early advertising middleman who purchased advertising space from newspapers at discounted rates and then sold that space to businesses for a profit. Rather than creating advertisements themselves, space brokers focused mostly on buying and selling ad space. Volney Palmer helped transform advertising into a professional business by connecting advertisers with newspaper publishers more efficiently. His agency later expanded beyond simply selling space and began helping clients and place advertisements strategically, which helped lay the foundation for the modern advertising agency. And you can see that he basically sold space to advertisers for 25% commission, and really kind of laid the foundation for how advertising agencies would work, from that point on. The first full service modern ad agency, by the way, was N.W. Ayer and Son. It worked primarily for advertisers and product companies. Manufacturers realized that their products were distinctive and associated with quality. Customers would ask for them by name. So we start to see, of course, branding, which is mentioned as part of a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. Advertising let manufacturers establish a special identity for their products. Few differences actually existed, but manufacturers were able to raise price of goods due to product quality or advertising, or at least how they could basically try to differentiate themselves, from from a similar product, right? So again, I think when we purchase things, even today in 2026, you might have, like for example, let's take the iPhone, right? There's always a big debate of, is it the iPhone? Should it be, the Google's version of it, the Android, right? Which is better? We have this and this and this, and oh, we have this new lens, or we have this new, whatever. And, even today we see it, right? And you see it in the shoes you wear and the food that you buy. It's pretty remarkable. But early enduring brands, Smith Brothers came along in the early 1850s. Then you had Campbell's Soup in 1869. And I just saw some Campbell's Soup on the store at Vaughn's just the other day. Quaker Oats in 1877 for all those folks who like oatmeal, right? And these are all brands that go, that are, especially Campbell and Quaker, that are still around today. Look how far back they go. That's a pretty significant history. Product differentiation represents the single biggest triumph of advertising. Basically, this idea that, you're selling a product and, a company convincing you that you absolutely have to have that product versus something that is almost the same thing, right next to it, right? So ads create demand by leading consumers to associate particular brands with quality, right? Think about, I don't know. Think about a watch, right? Rolex, right? Think about a car. Think about a car. You can buy yourself a Hyundai Tucson. That's what I own, right? Very simple car, and then all of a sudden someone's driving around in a Lamborghini, or a really nice Mercedes or something like that, and there's just this like aura of fanciness to it that a Tucson doesn't have, right? So in any event, packaging and the cost that packaging and advertising add to products leads to consumer complaints. So basically, I guess, the higher end the product is, and the fancier it has to be, sometimes that gets passed on to the consumer. And so that was obviously something that, we still see today, for example. All right, by the end of the 1800s, two sources accounted for half the revenue taken in by ad agencies. That would be patent medicines and department stores. 1/6 of all print ads came from either patent medicine and drug companies. Basically, before 1906, this is really interesting when it comes to patent medicines, for example, because you see that there was an actual Food and Drug Act passed because of this. Well, before 1906, pure Food and Drug Act patent medicine makers faced zero federal regulation. They aggressively marketed dangerous, addictive, or useless concoctions as miraculous cure-alls. These early elixirs used catchy slogans and paid testimonials to self-remedies for everything from minor colds to cancer. So, for example, here are some of the false claims that you see on your board. It says patent medicines made fraudulent claims about their curative powers, including the instant cures for terminal diseases. Nostrums like William Radham's microbe killer had the phrase "cures all diseases" embossed directly on the bottle. Similarly, Piso's cure for consumption claimed to heal tuberculosis, but contained a dangerous mix of chloroform, cannabis, opium, and alcohol. Reversing sudden death. In the late 18th century, Britain, Dr. Sibley's solar tincture was openly advertised as being able to restore life in the event of sudden death, in addition to curing various other and severe maladies. Safe soothing for infants. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was aggressively marketed to mothers as the best way to quiet and soothe fussy babies, despite being heavily laced with morphine and alcohol. Magical healing for female complaints. Tonics like Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound were sold as cures for almost every female ailment and physical distress, though their primitive active ingredient was alcohol. And if you remember, Coca-Cola in its early days had actual cocaine in its recipe. Can you imagine? So that obviously by 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed in part, to basically offset some of those things. By the early 1890s, more than 20% of ad space was devoted to department stores. And stores were often criticized for undermining small businesses. So interesting, because I don't want to say it's full circle, but think about today what Amazon, for example, is doing to just stores in general. Um, it's interesting how things come along that maybe use something like maybe use a cultural trend or some kind of technology, and then whatever has been there before can really kind of suffer from it. But in any event, by the time we by the time we get to the turn of the century, the 19th and into the early 20th century, advertising was contributing to major social changes. It influenced the transition from producer to consumer-oriented society. It promoted technological advances that made life easier, such as by leveraging new media like radio and illustrated catalogs, advertising shifted from simple product announcements to lifestyle education, helping households quickly adapt to new appliances and technologies. There were mail order catalogs. Retailers distributed illustrated catalogs, which brought vast selections of good and even full home kits directly to rural and urban consumers without requiring travel. I distinctly remember growing up, one of the things I most look forward to as a kid, and this will really date me, is the Sears Roebuck catalog. Sears would put out like these department stores would put out these like big catalogs, and you would like flip through them and see everything, and it would describe it, and then you could actually, you could mail order it at the end, and that was always an exciting thing, particularly around Christmas time. Appliance education. Ads explained how to safely operate and maintain new labor-saving devices such as washing machines, refrigerators, and vacuums, empowering families to adopt modern home management techniques. I mean, maybe think about what you use today, or your parents use today, or your roommates use today that is somewhat, technology and fancy. How did they learn about that, right? Brand reliability. National branding and standardized packaging allowed consumers to easily identify consistent, reliable products, making grocery and household shopping faster and more trustworthy. And of course, radio. Radio broadcasts. We talked about how radio had a huge effect on advertising. The boom in radio provided households with real-time news, weather, and entertainment alongside product announcements, instantly keeping communities informed and connected without leaving their living room. So, a lot of technology, particularly, and television later, of course, becomes a major sponsor of advertising, or a major tool, I should say, of advertising, connecting companies to consumer. Anyway, as we get into that 20th century, though, there was an emphasized and appealed, or advertising emphasized appeals to women through more than 99% of copywriters and ad execs. Though, I'm sorry, let me start over there. Advertising was very much geared toward women, because the 99% of copywriters and ad execs were men. Isn't that interesting? Because women constituted 70 to 80% of newspaper and magazine readers. So they were going after a certain demographic. And so advertisers knew this. And even if they were men writing the ads, creating the ads, they knew who their target market was. And the intention was to help female consumers feel good about defeating life's problems. Isn't that interesting? As we get into the 1920s, certainly, we talked about radio just now, just a bit ago. And if you remember during our radio chapter, obviously, early radio stations, if you remember, started in department stores. So there was already a consumer culture within the radio industry. And radio, of course, made millions of dollars off advertising revenue. Well, unfortunately, the stock market crash in October 1929, when the market crashed in October, it put a serious dent into advertising dollars. And one of the things that's so fascinating about a company or companies is that when a company starts to lose money, or obviously the financial situation is depressed, the first thing that generally the companies will do is to cut back on how much they spend on advertising, which seems counterintuitive, right? Because you want to keep people informed about what you make, what you're selling, what your new products are, but yet you cut back on advertising because it's obviously a fairly substantial part of your budget. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? And advertising, despite that, advertising expenditures, or I should say, because of that, advertising expenditures dropped from 2.8 to 1.7 billion. That's a significant decrease. And of course, one of the things we talked about is that radio kind of was a little bit insulated from it because television hadn't come along yet, but certainly the newspaper industry was profoundly affected, as was, if you remember, the sound and recording industry with Thomas Edison. So if you go back and research that whole thing about when we talked about sound and recording, I believe it was chapter 4, we talked about Edison's company going out of business because of it. But in World War II, advertising does pick up, and in particular, it picks up because we started really churning out war munitions and everything that was related to the war. You have to realize that we had 2 wars going. We were obviously at war with Japan. We were at war with Germany and Italy on the other side, on the Atlantic side, Japan on the Pacific side. And so there was a need to consistently raise money for the war effort. And so one of the things I think a lot of people don't realize is how much the use of advertising was beneficial to the war effort to try to get people, normal people like you and I, to part with our hard-earned money to put toward the war effort. So I want to show you a video. This was Orson Welles. Remember, we talked about him when we talked about, obviously, film. And I believe we also mentioned him in radio, if I'm not mistaken. But this was an ad that they asked Orson Welles to do to basically promote the war effort. So here is Orson Welles.
Mr. Welles, help wanted. Men, women, and children. Nature of work, hard, monotonous, back-breaking labor. Hours, 75 a week minimum. Pay, few cents an hour. Added inducement, 2 meals a day, including several ounces of bad bread and a cup of thin soup. Don't delay, apply at once. How'd you respond to a want ad like that, Mr. and Mrs. American working man and woman? You'd laugh, wouldn't you, and throw the paper in the trash basket. Dismiss the whole advertisement as some kind of a joke, but believe me, it's no joke. It's a simple statement of the working conditions that exist today in Nazi Germany and the conquered countries under Nazi rule. It's also an exact statement of the working conditions that will be imposed on you and every member of your family if the Nazis win this war. You yourself personally can stop them from winning, as you know. You don't have to give up your well-paid job to do it. You needn't have to be a soldier or a sailor or an airman or a nurse or a war worker to ensure American victory. Uncle Sam doesn't ask plain, ordinary, hard-working citizens like you to give him anything. All he asks, or as he does ask very seriously and very urgently, is that you loan him 10 cents out of every dollar you make. That's all there is to it. Lend Uncle Sam a dime to win this war, and he'll pay you back with interest when he's won it. The easiest, most convenient way to lend in these dimes is to enroll in the payroll savings plan. Just tell your boss to deduct 10 cents from every dollar he pays you and lend it to Uncle Sam in your name. Sign up for this simple savings plan today, and when victory comes, you'll have war bonds in your pockets instead of Axis bonds on your wrists.
So that is Orson Welles, and that is the U.S. government. Hold on, let me go back here. That is the U.S. government basically utilizing advertising, utilizing a major celebrity at the time, Orson Welles, a filmmaker, to drum up, or I should say to financially raise capital for a country that was basically fighting three, actually, if you include Italy, 3 major superpowers on both sides of this country. So very interesting. But in any event, after World War II, the Cold War between the Soviet Union, so when World War II ends, if you remember your history, Germany got divided up. Joseph Stalin, communist, basically took over Eastern Europe. We basically had a major influence over Western Europe with capitalism. So it was capitalism versus communism. And it was basically the start of the Cold War, which went on for decades, and in many ways we're kind of in a, well, I believe, sort of a Cold War version 2 at the moment. But in any event, there's always been this kind of like clash between communism and capitalism, and there's always been a deep-rooted suspicion of those, especially from my generation and our parents who have seen some of the, see communism in a much different light than I think, some folks, some younger generation folks right now do. But in any event, I'm not trying to preach here, other than to say that there's a definite distinction between capitalism and communism. And there were folks in the U.S. at the time who felt like Hollywood had many, yeah, I'll say that. I would say there was a perception. That's probably the easier way to say it. There was a perception that Hollywood had many directors, actors, creative folks who were sympathetic to the communist way of life, and that it was seeping its way into advertising. Therefore, basically, advertising having such an influential, could be so influential that it could influence, a generation of folks to essentially turn away from capitalism and embrace communism. Hope that makes sense. So people worried about communists infiltrating American society. Some actually saw advertising as mind control. So there was like this kind of negative connotation with it. Television obviously altered advertising. So, television brought an even broader audience to, or connected a much broader audience from companies to consumer. And this is also the era of subliminal advertising. So in the late 40s and early 50s, the idea of subliminal advertising, which is hidden or disguised messages that allegedly register in the subconscious. So let me show you an example of one of those. Actually, this is made more modern. This was a McDonald's ad that I ran across. And then I'm going to ask you, when we get done with this, I can't ask you because you can't answer me, but I'm going to tell you, let me do it this way. When we watch this ad, see if you can spot the subliminal messages within this 30-second spot, and then I'll try to review it when we're done. That makes much more sense. So hang on a second. Let me cue it up. And again, if this gets taken down, this will be one of the videos that I definitely will share in a separate document if it should so happen.
What do you think about that chapter on subliminal messaging? I'm not really buying it. Right. Yeah, it's been a pretty rough quarter. Well, at least we got this material down, fool. You hungry? This was all.
So a lot going on there. Let me back up here. If you can see this so I can get it queued up. In the book, there's actually, let me see if I can freeze it. Nope, he's already closed the book. In the book, going back forward to back here, watch the book here. He actually has a hamburger. That's actually a picture of a hamburger right there. And then there's actually, if you go further back, there's actually a picture on the wall that says "Silence is golden." Obviously, that means golden arches. That's kind of their logo. And then, of course, some of it was more obvious, right? Where you would see fries when the fries would flash up, and Coca-Cola would flash up, and a burger would flash up. And so, that's quote unquote an example of subliminal advertising. So let me get back to the lecture here and show you that in 1958, those ads were banned by the National Association of Broadcasters, but not by the federal government. And I think they've been basically there's been a move to not use subliminal advertising in any grand scale, because there is still, even in modern day, there is a suspicion of that. But anyway, McDonald's did make that ad and put it up on YouTube, which I thought was very, very fun. I just discovered that when I was doing some research. So in any event, until the 1960s, the shape and pitch of most ads were determined by a slogan. So a phrase that attempts to sell a product by capturing its essence in words. A diamond is forever. So if you look up, like we went through the top slogans of the 21st century, well, the top slogan of the 20th century was a diamond is forever. If you think about it, when you have an engagement ring, you're getting married, whatever, you're looking for, there's always this thing about diamonds are it, right? Well, how did that start? Well, you can make a very, very good argument that it was because of advertising back in the mid 20th century that has basically kind of taught us, programmed us that when we had an engagement or a very special occasion, that somehow it was associated with a diamond. Could have been associated with cooked carrots for all we could have done, right? I'm just joking, but a diamond is forever is definitely an ad slogan that is definitely today in 2026. Even if you don't know the slogan, when you think about getting engaged, right, or doing something significant for your partner, you think about diamonds, diamond earrings, diamond rings, the whole thing, right? Or diamond ring, not rings, plural. Not that wealthy. Anyway, modern design phases merged in the late 60s. Ad-rich magazines hired European designers as art directors. And I will say this, and I don't know if the book talks about this, but I certainly, one of the things that I might add here is that, when we talked about filmmaking, one of the things that we talked about was how the studio system, I believe we talked about this, how the studio system kind of like really contracted post World War II, and particularly after television came along. And so there were a lot of talented folks that wound up leaving movie studios, becoming independent. And a lot of those folks wound up getting into advertising. If you look at an ad, I don't have an example of it right now, but if you look at an ad from the late 50s, early 60s, they're very straightforward, misogynistic in a sense. There's an ad, a Folgers ad that I've run before in the past where basically it's an ad for coffee. It's like it's like a little 30-second like narrative, but it's very much what you would expect the 50s and 60s to be, early 60s to be, which is, the man is kind of portrayed as the kind of the strong force, the woman, the submissive and at home, stay at home and preparing coffee and dinner for her husband before he gets home from work. I mean, that was kind of the vibe, right? But as you see, as we get into the 70s and then certainly into the early 80s, you start to see a change in how advertising or narrative is modified. And so one of the, I think, seminal moments in advertising history is what happened in the early 1980s. In fact, it was in 1983 into 84. And I don't know if you guys have seen this ad, and this is one of those cases where this ad may get through here on YouTube, and if it doesn't, and you just see me talk about it, you can actually obviously click on it on a separate document. But this was an ad, which I will call up for you here, that was made by Apple Computer, and it is considered the kind of modern this is what led to Super Bowl ads. So here it is. And this was made by Ridley Scott. I'll tell you more about it when we're done. Okay.
Is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall forth themselves one day, and we will fight with their own cause. January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
So that was a very famous ad. It's the kind of the gold standard of advertising here. And it was created to launch the first Macintosh computer and positioned Apple as a revolutionary force in personal computing. It was directed by Ridley Scott of Blade Runner fame, and the ad was inspired by obviously George Orwell's novel 1984. It aired during the Super Bowl on January 22nd, 1984, and it showed a lone heroine symbolizing Apple smashing the screen, broadcasting Big Brother, symbolizing IBM, the company IBM, and conformity. And of course, the tagline on January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984. Very famous. The ad broke traditional marketing norms using storytelling and symbolism instead of product features. It aired nationally only once, but became a cultural and marketing landmark. And it's often credited with redefining Super Bowl advertising and cementing Apple's image as an innovator and disruptor. And believe it or not, here's another little known fact about that ad. It was actually shown in a small market, I think in Idaho, about 2 weeks before it actually aired, because obviously Scott and the folks that created it were interested to see what kind of reaction they would get to it. But everything that you see from here on that point on, Super Bowl wise, ad wise, narrative wise, really can really be, I guess, pointed back to not just that ad, but the fact that obviously this was also during the era of MTV, when MTV came along. So it influenced, this ad, MTV, influenced many ads and agencies in the 1980s. And, that included rapid edits, creative camera angles, compressed narratives, and staged performances. They were short, polished musical performances and songs used in ads of the era, which provided a model for the popular music and TikTok videos today. So the era of the music video was, of course, during this time. And so that very much became part of advertising. So, and you juxtapose that with just go look at an ad from the late 1950s or 60s, and it's a completely different ballgame. The internet, obviously, 1990s, and computers in general and smartphones have had a significant effect, or impact, I should say, and effect on visual design and advertising. In the 1990s, TV and print designs mimic drop-down menu of computer interfaces. In the 21st century, ads are more three-dimensional, interactive, with a simpler design. A lot of what we see on our phone, a lot of what we see on the computer winds up looking very similar when it's on, traditional forms of media. Digital ads have become successful because they target individuals. We're in the era of digital advertising, right? And they collect information, the companies do, through cookies, online surveys, SSO strategies, which track ad impressions and click-throughs. We are an open book when we are surfing on the web. We are an open book when we're going through and purchasing things at the grocery store and things we go buy shoes, or we go buy clothes, we go to a department store, we get online on Amazon and we start ordering things. That's all getting tracked, guys. And so it's no mistake that when you start to see things show up that are things that you like or like to buy, or influenced by, that's no accident. Data combines with retail sales. Data develop profiles about consumer tastes, interests, values, emotions, and purchasing power. We are an open book. We are open book from a digital standpoint. It's kind of scary how much the webosphere, I'll call it that, like it's some kind of evil being. The webosphere knows about us, because it does, because it's all about predictive marketing, right? New marketing strategy involves data that helps advertisers target consumers with ads today and predict what they might want to purchase down the road. Obviously, social media, we've talked about how social media and its algorithms, advertising has algorithms as well, and traditional paid ads encourage viewers to promote products through likes, which are essentially personal endorsements, or influencers. Think about just a modern day influencer on TikTok and Instagram, and the fact that a lot of these folks don't even, they don't have to disclose whether they're being paid, and are they actually using these products, or are they just getting paid to act like they're using these products? It's a really gray area, but that's where we are now. Ad agencies divide labor among 5 departments. account management, account planning, market research, creative development, and media coordination. Account managers are sales executives who find clients and maintain those relationships. Account planners develop effective advertising strategies. You also have market researchers that assess behaviors and attitudes of consumers toward particular products. So like focus groups, for example, they might actually a company might create some kind of product, and market research, basically those that work with market research are there to test and see if the particular product is or line that they use is good. I remember one of the things I remember about Coca-Cola, for example. You can look this up on the internet, but years ago, Coca-Cola actually came out with New Coke, right? Because they had made these, they thought that they had done their research and that people would prefer to have a new recipe when it came to Coca-Cola, more like Pepsi, if you will, and it was an epic fail. And so they wound up coming back with classic Coke. So basically it was the original recipe. And so the Coke that you drink today is called classic Coca-Cola or just Coca-Cola. But at one point there was something called New Coke. I welcome you to take a look at that. But also, think about when it comes to Coca-Cola, for example, the can that you buy. Like if you do Coke Zero, for example, the diet part of it, there's Diet Coke and then there's Coke Zero. Coke Zero's can looks a lot like a Coca-Cola can. That's not by accident, right? That comes out of market research. You also have values and lifestyles, or VALs for short. Assumes that not every product suits every consumer and encourages advertisers to vary their sales slants to find market niches. All right, niches. Anyway, and that can be that's much easier to do now because of the digital trail that we leave. That companies can actually gear things toward our particular interests and likes based on how much we click, surf, scroll, doom scroll, whatever, right? Creative development is the nerve center of advertising, right? Writers and artists create rough sketches and words and graphics for print and online ads, prepare working scripts for radio, and develop storyboards for TV. So there's a big process that goes into making these ads. There's a very creative team. That doesn't even include, the visual effects people and everybody else that has to create some of this stuff. But storyboards, by the way, are a sort of blueprint or roughly drawn comic strip version of the potential ad. We also see, by the way, storyboards in the film industry as well, where it's like kind of a mini movie, right? It's kind of a mini narrative. And so these mini narratives, which are obviously in the advertising universe, are basically built by storyboards. Just as in the film universe, when you have narrative films, those are storyboarded as well. And for the digital media, creative team develops websites, interactive tools and games, downloads and viral marketing, content designed to gain widespread attention as users share it with friends. In terms of viral marketing, gosh, there's like the viral marketing just about 10 years ago was probably one of the most important ad strategies that was out there. And even today, you could say it's still an important, relevant strategy because although it might not be as dominant or as groundbreaking as it once was, it still remains a key tool for brands aiming to increase awareness, generate buzz, drive consumer engagement. I'm going to show you actually a couple of examples here of viral advertising in just a bit, but yeah. So anyway, so here's why viral advertising continues to matter. Wider reach and engagement. It's cheaper for companies. They just create a really cool ad. And basically, watch it kind of like sort of. So if you see something you really think is cool, if it's an ad that's made, you're going to share it. Oh my gosh, take a look at this. And then it just gets an incredible amount of reach, more so from an organic standpoint than, having to spend however much money it is to buy 30 seconds or a minute's worth of a spot, on like something as expensive as the Super Bowl or even like something in prime time, right? But in any event, neither creative nor strategic side of the business can predict which ads and campaigns will succeed. Who produces ads? Well, there is media coordination. Media planners analyze the effectiveness of various media channels. You have so-called media buyers, which negotiate rates and place ads with specific media outlets determined by planners. You have saturation advertising, which is a variety of media are inundated with ads aimed at target audiences. So we see that. I would say we're going to talk a little bit about political advertising here to end this, but I can tell you that one of the things that you're seeing now, you're seeing one of the things that's consistent is the saturation advertising of political advertising. That you see it everywhere, and it's and it as annoying as it is, it's very much a strategy. Well, there are persuasive techniques in contemporary advertising, right? As we get to like the modern era, right? Space and time constraints lead advertisers to use a variety of persuasive techniques. Now, space and time constraints, meaning obviously we were used to having a 30-second ad forever on television, but those ads, as you know, are getting trimmed to 5, 10, 15 seconds because we're not watching television. So in many cases, when we're actually seeing things on social media or watching YouTube, for example, we can't wait to hit the skip button. So how do you persuade someone to buy your product if you have maybe not as much time, or maybe you can't advertise, for example, in a magazine or a newspaper like you used to because no one's reading them, right? So you have famous person testimonials. This has been and this goes back obviously this has a long history, which is famous person testimonials. But a current example is Nike using athletes like LeBron James and Serena Williams, right? Their success and popularity encourages consumers to trust and buy Nike products. I just saw one last night, not with LeBron, but Walter Goggins on on Walmart. Actor Walter Goggins. I've seen Chloe Kim, Michaela Schifrin is the skier is always doing stuff, right? And then you have what's called the plain folks pitch, which is Subaru often uses commercials featuring ordinary families, pets, everyday life situations. The ad focuses on safety, reliability, and simplicity to make consumers feel vehicles are designed for regular people rather than luxury buyers. So, basically associates the product with simplicity. There's the snob appeal approach, which attempts to persuade consumers that a product will maintain or elevate their social status. I mentioned it earlier, Rolex are a strong example of snob appeal. They're presented as symbols of wealth, prestige, and high social status. And the message suggests owning the product elevates a person's image and success. And you will see Rolex, for example, like at F1, Rolex and F1 are very much tied to the hip, as is, like, for example, the U.S. Open golf, which, folks that watch U.S. Open golf are often, over the age of 40 and have more money than the average bear. Then you have the bandwagon effect, which points out in an exaggerated claims that everyone is using a particular project. Sorry, let me go back. Okay, product, I should say. So TikTok marketing often creates the impression that everyone is using it. Viral trends, influencer participation, and phrases like "join the trend" encourage people to download this app because they do not want to feel left out. That would be TikTok, right? Don't think TikTok is just there for the the fun videos and the trends. It's there for the advertising, as is every other social media channel. Then you have the hidden fear appeal, which plays on consumers' sense of insecurity. So, for example, ADT commercials frequently use hidden fear appeal by showing possible home break-ins or unsafe situations. These ads make viewers think about their own safety and encourage them to purchase security systems for protection. LifeLock was another one, if I remember, about stealing your identity, if you remember those ads that played. And then you have irritation advertising, which creates product name recognition by being just annoying or obnoxious. So a well-known modern example is the repetitive commercials from Liberty Mutual featuring the slogan "Liberty, Liberty, Liberty." Some viewers find the ads annoying, but the repetition makes the company name memorable, which is the main goal of irritation advertising, right? You hate it so much, you love it. Isn't that right? So widely used technique is also the persuasive technique is called association principle, which associates a product with a positive cultural value or image, maybe nationalism, happy families, success, freedom, even if it has little connection to the product. So, for example, Coca-Cola is one of the best examples of association advertising. Their commercials often connect Coca-Cola with happiness, friendship, holidays, and family gatherings. The product itself is just a soft drink, but the advertisements make consumers associated with positive emotions and memorable experiences. You have nationalism, right? Ford Motor Company frequently uses patriotic themes in commercials, including American flags, hardworking families, and built Ford tough messaging. And these ads connect the brand with a national pride and American values rather than only focusing on vehicle features. Also, success and luxury. Apple, iPhone, MacBook, with creativity, intelligence, innovation, and personal success. That would be a good example. And the commercial suggesting that owning Apple products reflects a modern and successful lifestyle. Jeep commercials regularly show people driving through mountains, deserts, and forests. So that would be associated with freedom and adventure, right? Then you have real and natural claims. Nature Valley markets its granola bars using images of oats, honey, farms, and outdoor scenery to create a natural image. However, the products are still processed packaged foods with added ingredients and preservatives. And of course, one of the things that drives me nuts is in this real and natural era is organic and healthy lifestyle marketing. Starbucks often promotes drinks and foods with terms like plant-based, natural flavors, or clean ingredients. These phrases encourage consumers to view products as healthier or more authentic, even though many items remain highly processed. And of course, then you have family values, right? Which is Family Values Association. Disney uses emotional storytelling and characters like Mickey Mouse to associate the brand with childhood memories, family bonding, and happiness. The emotional connection becomes part of the marketing strategy across movies, theme parks, and merchandise. So family values. In fact, it's coming early. Disneyland is your last extra credit word. Disneyland, just for that. Disneyland. All right. Disassociation corollary emerged in response to corporate mergers. And public skepticism to distance unfavorable company associations. Major corporations present products as though from smaller independent companies. So, example, McDonald's held majority stake in Chipotle, but connection never promoted in Chipotle marketing. It's interesting. I was just like in a conversation that Chick-fil-A and Raising Cane's, there's a trend, if you notice, that anytime a Chick-fil-A goes in, you'll see a Raising Cane's going in a very similar area or corner. And it's because these companies actually wind up, like Chick-fil-A, for example, winds up and Raising Cane's go to great lengths to basically do market research before they open somewhere to obviously maximize profits. So don't know if that relates to anything here, but just thought I'd throw that in there because I thought that was interesting. Anyway, product companies and ad agencies have become adept at product placement. So if you watch Stranger Things, lots of product placement. Emily in Paris, that's on Netflix. Kind of a fun little comedy that's in like season 5 or 6. They're constantly name dropping and using brands that hopefully will, it's built into the plot basically. So you're not having to sit there and actually feel like you're getting knocked over the head with it. Trips to Subway on The Biggest Loser, right? That's another one. By the way, in the interest of time, I am going to skip this, but basically feel free to click on it. And it was made by Cheddar a few years ago, and it talks all about kind of a history of product placement, which is really fascinating. And believe it or not, product placement didn't just start like 5, 10, 15 years ago. It goes all the way back to the Lumiere brothers back in the late 1800s. And you see examples of product placement all up through history when it comes to media. So one of the things that it spotlights, by the way, is this idea of Reese's Pieces, which was associated with ET back in the 1980s. But I would highly encourage you to watch that video because I think you will find it very informative. Anyway, Netflix engages in co-promotional product placement. Products featured in shows in exchange for promotional support from the brands. So viewers of Stranger Things, by the way, have seen product placements for Coke, Nike, Burger King, and Baskin-Robbins, right? So you know that Netflix doesn't have traditional ads, right? Because it's basically on demand. Well, Netflix will then actually create or work with companies to do these shows and then build these things into the narrative so they can share in the revenue. And then, of course, we have what we had mentioned earlier, which is viral advertising. I wanted to swing back to this. And I wanted to, if I can find my notes here, share with you a couple of examples. Give me 2 seconds. I know I have it here. Yeah, here we go. So the idea of viral advertising is that you see an ad, it's super cool, and really basically the cost of the ad is the production value of it. And then when the ad gets distributed, if it's distributed in a viral way, again, a company like Apple doesn't have to spend a bunch of money on traditional television or even basically even advertising in the front of videos on YouTube. It can literally create these things, share it, and then hope that the audience on social media is so enamored with it that they'll share it amongst each other and basically create this unbelievably rich market of eyeballs to watch the actual show. So for example, I remember I used to show an ad back to my class about 10 years ago that involved a popular NASCAR driver by the name of Jeff Gordon, and he did something called Test Drive. You're welcome to look it up, search it on Google. But basically, it was made by Pepsi, and it was to I think if I remember, it was to advertise their diet Pepsi drink. And Jeff Gordon basically took this used car salesman on a ride, the ride of his life. That garnered somewhere in the neighborhood of like 40 to 50 million views. And then they did a sequel because there were folks in the industry that were questioning whether it was legit. And then they played a prank on one of the Jeff Gordon and team played a prank on one of the critics. And it's pretty funny. So if you look at, but all told, I would say that video is probably shared well over 100 million times, and I might even be underselling it. And think about, and each ad, by the way, was like 3 or 4 minutes long. So think about if you took that 4-minute ad and you bought that in the Super Bowl, that would be $14 million a minute. So 14 times 4 would be 40, $56 million just to put that one ad on the air in the Super Bowl, when you can literally reach 100 million people for free like that because you're on the viral nature of what you are. So in any event, I want to share these with you. Let's do I gotta move my screen around a bit so I can see it. Okay, so this one is the Apple ad, and basically to give you kind of a background on this, and again, if this doesn't show up on the actual lecture, I'll make sure to put this on a separate document in Canvas so you can watch it. But anyway, this was released during the 2024 holiday season. It's called the Heartstrings ad, and it depicted a heartfelt narrative of a father with a hearing loss reconnecting with his family through the AirPods 2 hearing assistant capabilities. And so the ad, well, I'll let you watch it and then I'll tell you what they said about it. So here is the ad. It's about 2 minutes, by the way.
We got it last week. I think I know what it is. Oh, guys, thank you. No. Listen. Light the fire. You place the flowers in the vase that you bought today. I'm so excited. Haley. Happy birthday. What is that? Everything is easy 'cause oh, I love you, Papa. You.
Fantastic ad. It doesn't bring a little tear to your eye. You're not human. No, I'm just kidding. But in any event, so the ad was lauded for its emotional depth and effective storytelling, with marketing experts highlighting its ability to create a strong emotional connection with viewers. While specific sales figures were not disclosed, the combination of innovative features and emotionally resonant advertising positioned the AirPods Pro 2 as a compelling option in the hearing assistant market. This move not only expanded Apple's product functionality, but also opened avenues in the healthcare technology sector, potentially influencing consumer perception and purchasing decisions. So in any event, great ad. And that's not the only one. The last one I want to show you, and I will cue it up right here. That is Jean-Claude Van Damme. If you don't know who that is, he is a former action star, that was big in the 1980s, the latter part of the 1980s and the 90s, kind of fell off the map for a bit. And then all of a sudden in 2013, created this, worked with Volvo to create what's called the Epic Split. And I won't tell you what he does because I don't want to ruin the surprise. But again, what I'm going to do here is play the ad. And if for some reason you see an awkward jump cut here, and then I will make sure this ad is in its entirety on a separate document in Canvas. But anyway, here is Jean-Claude Van Damme, the Epic Split.
I've had my ups and downs, my fair share of bumpy roads and heavy winds. That's what made me what I am today. Now I stand here before you. What you see is a body crafted to perfection, a pair of legs engineered to defy the laws of physics, and a mindset to master the most epic of splits.
So that is a very famous ad, and it garnered well over 100 million views on YouTube within weeks of its release. It received widespread acclaim and had a significant financial impact for Volvo and its dynamic steering. Basically, the combination of Van Damme's performance, Enya's only time, and the demonstration of Volvo's dynamic steering system captivated audiences worldwide. And it won multiple Cannes Lions Awards, was recognized as one of the most effective and iconic automotive ads ever created. And just so you know, it had a production budget estimated between $3 and $5 million, $3 million and $5 million rather, but generated over 170 million in revenue for Volvo. So a very good return, and just an unbelievable ad. And I'm looking down here, 127 million views, and it was put out 12 years ago. So now you know about that. So hopefully, again, if you didn't see the ad in this lecture, it is definitely, I'll probably just wind up putting these all on a separate piece just so you can see them. Anyway, back to the lecture here. We round third and head for home. Let's talk about, lastly, what political advertising and modern elections, how they associate with advertising. Because I think when we think of advertising now, particularly this time of year, you're getting inundated with political ads, right? And so how much money is spent on political advertising? Well, last year, 2 years ago rather, in 2024, that became the most expensive in U.S. election cycle in history. Now, election cycles are every 2 years. Right now, we're in the midterm year. 2 years from now, of course, we'll be, voting for a new president. But in any event, in 2024, political advertising reached approximately $11 billion. That's just in this country. $8 billion for television, $3 billion for digital. That's how much money was spent. And digital ads dominated platforms such as YouTube, as you know, Meta, that's Facebook, and streaming services. Pennsylvania, by the way, became the first state to surpass $1 billion in campaign advertising during a single election cycle. And much of this spending comes from basically super PACs, wealthy donors, dark money organizations, political action committees, and it's just, basically modern campaigns heavily rely on nonstop television, social media, streaming, and internet advertising to influence voters. So why political advertising can be corrosive, right? Campaigns often rely on emotional appeals instead of policy discussion. Fear, anger, and outrage often attract more attention than facts or solutions, right? It encourages division. Ads are designed to emotionally target specific groups of voters. Social media algorithms repeatedly expose people to messages that reinforce existing beliefs. Money creates unequal influence. Billionaires and large organizations can dominate public conversation through the massive ad spending, and ordinary citizens often feel their voices are less important than wealthy donors. And the spread of misinformation. Sound familiar? Right? Online political ads can spread exaggerated claims or misleading information quickly. Micro-targeted ads may show different messages to different audiences with little transparency. So political discussion becomes more emotional, polarized, and distrustful rather than focused on productive debate. Boy, it sounds familiar, right? How about effects on national discourse, right? What does this political advertising do? Well, it increases political hostility and polarization. It reduces trust in government and media. It encourages sensationalism over thoughtful discussion, makes elections feel like marketing campaigns instead of civic conversations. It has, maybe some and obviously misinformation spreads rapidly online and on television, as we know. And lying is kind of the thing, right? So how about possible solutions? Greater transparency for political donations, stronger discourse rules for online advertising, limits on dark money and spending, increased media literacy education for voters, right? Political advertising is an important part of free speech and democracy, but when billions of dollars dominate elections, public debate can become shaped more by money and manipulation than by informed civic discussion. Or in other words, whoever has the most money oftentimes winds up winning the race, regardless of how poor a candidate that person or that issue can be. So it's something to think about when it comes to advertising. So I pretty much have covered everything that I could cover when it comes to chapter 10. I know the book talks about a couple other things that I didn't hit, but I feel like these are the most important points. I'm going to encourage you again to watch this, in its entirety, this lecture in its entirety. There'll be plenty of questions, obviously, on a quiz for this and on your final exam. And again, if for some reason there are awkward spots in this where it appears there should be a video and it isn't, that's only because YouTube got me. So hopefully it doesn't. But again, I'm going to try to put as much as I can of the links on a separate document in Canvas so that you have at least access to it. So if you want to watch them again, you can, and you don't have to, go through 25 slides to get to each link. So in any event, have a great day. That is it, the last lecture of the semester. I will have some closing thoughts, by the way, on another video the final week, or when I open up the final module of week 17, which is only going to be the final exam, by the way. But hopefully you've enjoyed all these lectures, and hopefully sometime in the future I'll see you here in person on campus. Come say hello. All right.